Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. In our last video, I said that Week 5 was shaping up to be much more exciting than Week 4, and it certainly lived up to the hype as we saw tons of thrilling matchups, convincing wins, and a handful of upsets. Overall, we saw 7 teams in the top 25 lose in Week 5, but 5 of those came in ranked versus ranked matchups. The only 2 teams that lost to unranked teams were Virginia Tech going on the road and defeating the ranked Duke team, and also Florida going on the road and taking care of Mississippi State. Dan Mullen's return to Starkville. Those were the only 2 teams that were ranked that lost to unranked opponents. It was a very exciting week, though. I'll start with the big elephant in the rooms. Obviously, the ending of that Ohio State-Penn State game. That was the biggest game of Week 5, the one in Happy Valley, the whiteout. And Penn State had that game in the bag. They were up by 13 in the first half, up by 12, I believe it was, in the fourth quarter, and allowed Ohio State to crawl themselves back into that game to take a 1-point lead. And then, as we all know, the 4th and 5 call for the Nittany Lions. Probably the worst play call I have ever seen in any college football game that I have ever watched. If you watched that game, which I'm sure many of you did, Trace McSorley was having himself a night against that Ohio State defense. Over 150 yards on the ground by himself, then over 200 yards through the air. And yet Penn State decided to run the ball on 4th and 5 against a very stiff Ohio State defensive line that had only given up 38 rushing yards to Penn State that game, to the running back. So that was just an unbelievable call. Also, they had 3 timeouts that they burned. You know, Penn State called a timeout, then Ohio State called a timeout, then Penn State called another timeout. So they had plenty of time to think this over, and that was the best play that they could come up with when the game was on the line. Now, some people have even said maybe the season was on the line for the Nittany Lions in that game. So a shocking game there, but I give a lot of credit to Urban Meyer and his Buckeyes team for not giving up and going on the road and getting a huge win over the Nittany Lions in what was another classic for the 3rd straight year. We saw Clemson. Trevor Lawrence goes down with an injury. Kelly Bryant, as we all know, deciding that he wants to transfer. So Clemson battling back against Syracuse, down 16-7 at one point, finally winning that game 27-23. So that took a lot of resilience and a lot of strength from that Clemson team to be able to come back against a very good Syracuse team. And so it's going to be interesting to see, you know, how the quarterback situation going forward. I know some people were saying Kelly Bryant should come back or was thinking about coming back. Don't think that's going to happen at all. But this, you know, it makes you question the transfer rule, makes you question the thought that goes through these players' minds. Had Kelly Bryant stayed, he would have been put in that game, and Clemson would have been in a much better position. So even if you lose the starting job at any position, you've got to be there for your team because you never know when you're going to be needed. So that was obviously a major storyline there. As we mentioned earlier, Dan Mullen in Florida returning back to Starkville and got a huge win over Mississippi State. It was a defensive slugfest, 13-6 in the Gators' favor. Notre Dame taking care of Stanford in a game that had major college football playoff implications, annihilating the Cardinal, the Fighting Irish moving up to number 6 in this last week's AP poll. And then, of course, Kentucky. You know, many people thought that South Carolina was going to be the 2nd favorite in the East right behind Georgia. And Kentucky has taken care of the Gamecocks, beat them by 14. They're now number 13 in the AP poll. And obviously, in my opinion, the 2nd best team in the SEC East right now, right behind Georgia. They've taken care of South Carolina. They've taken care of Florida. Obviously, that date against Georgia is coming up in a few weeks. That's going to be a huge game. That one in Kentucky getting to host that game. Have a tough test against Texas A&M this coming Saturday. But Kentucky seriously looking like legitimate contenders in the SEC East right now. Not enough to beat Georgia, I don't think, but obviously the 2nd best team in my opinion. So this week, we didn't do too bad, didn't do too great though. We're going to break down our teams trending up and trending down, how we did on predictions. Our Week 5, we went 26-11, which is right at 70%, 70.3%. And obviously some of the, you know, we made 3 prediction changes. I put that out on my Twitter. We got all of those correct. Indiana over Rutgers, Notre Dame over Stanford, and there was one other, Kentucky over South Carolina. We changed all of those picks, got them all right, so it could have been a little bit worse, but we were able to get 26-11 in what was a wild week of college football, one that I really think shaped kind of who were the contenders and who were the pretenders, if that makes sense. Our overall record now, 186-50, which is right at 78.8%, 79 if you want to round up. And this is about where we were last year at this time. We may have been a little bit better, but, you know, 79%, well above that 76% mark that we're trying to beat from last year. Would love to crack 80 or be above 80 at the end of the season, but right now we're in a very good spot. Hopefully these records will continue to improve as these weeks go on. Against the spread, if you took my spread picks that I put out on Twitter, you would have gone 4-4 if you had taken all of those, right at 500. Obviously, there were some that were extremely close. I picked Penn State in that game. Obviously, that worked out in our favor. favor, as they were 3.5 or 3-point underdogs, only losing by 1. So 4-4 against the spread, bring our total to 37-26, 58.7%, 59 if you want to round up, well above 50%, which is really our goal for this season. Is just to stay above 50%. You know, if you're above that, you're making money. So that's obviously the goal there, and we've obviously made some over these past couple of weeks. So, our team's trending up and trending down. We'll start over here with the trending up side. We got North Carolina State, and obviously that's a team, you know, that I wasn't super high on in the preseason. They're undefeated right now. I think they would be a one-loss team had that game against West Virginia not been canceled. We have some notes here on the Wolfpack. Obviously playing extremely well with Ryan Finley at quarterback. For their next 3 games, though, Boston College, at Clemson, and at Syracuse. There is a legitimate chance that they could lose all 3 of those games, if not, probably 2 of those games. On the road at Syracuse, who's obviously much more improved. Clemson, the number 3 team in the nation, number 4 team in the nation, excuse me, having dropped this past week. So there's a chance they could lose all 3 of those, or maybe they beat Boston College but lose to Clemson and Syracuse. So I think the schedule is about to get a little bit tougher for North Carolina State, and how they respond to that, how they play, and this back half of the schedule is really going to determine. I think they will make a bowl game. I had them at 6-6 in the season, but determines which bowl game they're going to go to and how they're going to improve themselves in the standings. They just jumped into the rankings here, but the schedule is about to get tough, so there's a legitimate chance you can see them trending down here in a few weeks if those next 3 games don't go very well for them. Washington State, a team that has extremely surprised me this season. I think I only had them pegged at 4-8 this year after the amount of starters they lost, a star quarterback and Luke Falk going to the NFL draft, bringing in Gardner Minshew from ECU. I knew that was going to be a solid quarterback transfer, but not enough, I didn't think, to compete in the Pac-12 this year with a lot of missing pieces. Probably the most inexperienced team in terms of returning starters and lettermen going into this season. But Washington State and Mike Leach have done a phenomenal job of proving me wrong and proving some of the doubters wrong. 4-1 right now. That lone loss, a 3-point loss to USC. Their game-tying field goal, potential game-tying field goal, was blocked by the Trojans. So Mike Leach doing a great job. Their next 3 games, Oregon State, Oregon, and Stanford. So there's a legitimate chance that they could be, you know, 6-2, 5-3, somewhere around there. They'll beat Oregon State. I'll have faith in that, but whether or not they can split that series against Oregon and Stanford, that'll be huge for this Cougars team. But Mike Leach has certainly done a phenomenal job here. He should get the Cougars back to a bowl game, something that I did not see happening this season. Indiana, another team, kind of like Washington State, that surprised me a little bit. I think I had them at 5-7 or 6-6. Beating Rutgers this past week, only by a touchdown though. You've got Ohio State, Iowa, and Penn State coming up for the Hoosiers. There's a chance they could beat Iowa. Penn State and Ohio State, though, are a little bit of a stretch, so if you do that, they'll be 5-3, which is a couple games left to play. They should get back to a bowl game. I had them, I think, at 5-7, made the Rutgers prediction change, had them up to 6-6 now, and I think that's probably about right for the Hoosiers, who have you know, some difficult games coming up. Lost to Michigan State, so they're out of the way, but like I said, Ohio State and Penn State still coming up there. And then Florida, 4-1, lone loss to Kentucky, an excusable loss, who's number 13 in the nation right now, coming off big-time wins against Tennessee and Mississippi State. Their next 3 games, LSU, at home, Vanderbilt, and then Georgia. So I think they will take care of Vanderbilt, so that you can put them up at 5-1 there. Whether or not they can split the series against LSU and Georgia, that will be key for Dan Mullen and this Gators team if they want to try to get themselves to a solid bowl game and still try to compete in the SEC East. I mean, obviously, you know, Kentucky's bound to slip up at some point. They might slip up this weekend against Texas A&M. Who knows? So Florida is still technically in that running. This Georgia game is going to be much more competitive than it has been in the past couple years. Florida is still trying to improve. I think Georgia will get the win there, but Dan Mullen's going to have his team ready to go and make it a lot more interesting than some will expect. So he has them certainly on the right track. I know people were questioning that after that Kentucky loss in the swamp, but he certainly has them back on track, especially with that huge win over Mississippi State. Teams trending down. Mississippi State, back-to-back losses now for the Bulldog and Joe Moorhead. You've got losses to Kentucky and Florida, 28-7 to the Wildcats, and losing 13-6 to Florida at home against the Gators. So that's very disappointing for a team that's supposed to have a very high-octane offense led by a star quarterback in Nick Fitzgerald. Florida, a team that really hasn't been known for their defense, or has been known for their defense under Jim McElwain, but we had questions about that. Dan Mullen, being more of an offensive-minded coach, did a phenomenal job shutting them down. They're 3-2. Their big win coming against Kansas State back in week 2. But, you know, they've dropped out of the rankings now, and you've got to start to question what's going to happen with this Mississippi State team, who many thought might be the biggest competitor to Alabama in the SEC West when the season began. Now, of course, we have LSU still in there, Auburn still in there, and their next two games for Mississippi State, ironically, are Auburn and LSU. So how will they respond to that? Can they get a win over Auburn? I don't think they'll get a win on the road to LSU in Baton Rouge, but can they still win at home to try to keep their season alive? If they lose both of those, they're going to be below 500, which is something that not many people expected, including myself. Utah, 2-2. This was a year that many people thought that Utah could maybe break through in the Pac-12 South and make the Pac-12 championship game, and they have really just laid an egg and been extremely disappointed. They're 2-2. They had back-to-back losses to Washington and Washington State. Washington, excusable. That was a 21-7 loss for the Utes. And Washington, you know, I think the cream of the crop in the Pac-12 right now. I think they are the top dog in the Pac-12 after seeing Stanford's performance against Notre Dame. Washington State, understandable as well. I believe that game was on the road for Utah. Obviously a team that surprised us, but still 2-2 in a year that they were supposed to maybe break through when we thought that the South might be a little weaker. But here you have Colorado undefeated in the rankings now. That are making a little bit of a run. You still have USC, who was always going to be fairly decent. So you just got to start to wonder, you know, what's going on with this Utah team. Their next three games: Stanford, Arizona, and USC. So they're going to have to win a couple of those games to keep their season alive. You can't afford to lose all three of those games and be 2-5 and try to stay relevant in the Pac-12. South Carolina also sitting at 2-2, losing, like I said, this past week to Kentucky. And that's understandable after seeing the way this Kentucky team has played. But like I said, they were the team that many thought was going to be the biggest threat to Georgia in the SEC East, and they have not shown that this season, and I don't think they're going to show that for the rest of the season as well. Florida's doing better than expected. They have a big game against Missouri coming up. They have Texas A&M coming up in Tennessee. Those are their next three games: Missouri, Texas A&M, and Tennessee. Luckily for the Gamecocks, those are all at home, and looking at the way these teams have played, they could potentially win all those games. So there's a chance that South Carolina could flip the script and be on teams trending up in the next few weeks if they win all of those games and are sitting at 5-2 going into Week 8 or Week 9. But right now, Will Muschamp has a lot of work to do with this South Carolina team. His only wins, I believe, have come over Vanderbilt and Coastal Carolina, getting blown out against Georgia and then losing by 14 to Kentucky. So they haven't had a chance and really haven't performed well in their big games and the ones that matter. And then Kansas State, the only team up here that is really below 500 right now, 2-3 for the Wildcats. Losses to Mississippi State, West Virginia, and Texas. A game against Texas they nearly won, 19-14 is what they lost. Down 19-0, battled back, just could not get a last-second stop and give their offense a chance to try to go down there and win the game. Their next coming games, though, are Baylor, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, and TCU. There is a legitimate chance here that we could see a 2-7 Kansas State team, something that we don't see very often, or I don't know if we've ever seen with Bill Snyder at Kansas State. I mean, Baylor, they could win, but I don't see them beating Oklahoma State. I don't see them beating Oklahoma and Kyler Murray. And then TCU has put up some good fights in recent games, giving Ohio State a fight, giving Texas a fight, and then taking care of Iowa State this past weekend, but not in dominating fashion. I don't see Bill Snyder letting these games get away from him, but I don't see them beating Oklahoma. I don't see them beating Oklahoma State. Maybe they could steal one against Baylor on the road. Maybe they could steal one against TCU. But the Wildcats have their work cut out for them. We knew this wasn't going to be one of Bill Snyder's better teams that he's had, but we definitely didn't expect anything this bad as of right now. So Kansas State has some work cut out for them, especially after blowout losses to Mississippi State and West Virginia. They looked improved in that Texas game. Still have a ways to go. Whether or not they'll remain on the team's trending down list in the weeks to come, we'll have to wait and find out. And over the course of the rest of the season, you might see some repeats on the teams trending up and trending down. You know, you start to run out of teams that are trending up and trending down over the course of the season. We've seen teams like UCLA that might not even win a game this year. So, I mean, with the way their Pac-12 schedule is shaping up for the rest of the season. So they might pop up again on teams trending down. You might see some new guys if someone surprises us. We'll just have to wait and see. But you might start seeing some repeats here, but obviously they'll be for different reasons. And we'll have some different analysis on those teams determining whether or not they're on the up or down list. So Week 6 coming up. We're at the halfway point of the college football season for most teams. We got after that, 6 games will have been played. We got 6 remaining until postseason starts. So make sure you keep your eye out for that. Make sure you're watching out for that Week 6 prediction video that will be coming out very, very soon. Go check us out on Predictive as well for some extra analysis there. We're going to be doing a lot more analysis on some of the bigger games of Week 6 over on Predictive, so we'd always appreciate your support there on Twitter at Gridiron Expert. Go check us out there. We have spread picks, we have in-game analysis live as the games are going, so you can go check us out there. We'd appreciate your support. We're using the hashtags, we're doing everything like that, so you can find us fairly easily at Gridiron Expert, and we're going to try to be doing some live streams here soon, and as I've always said, I will be putting that out on social media, maybe even make a short YouTube video letting you know when we will be going live, so make sure you keep your eye out for that. That should be coming in the next few days or the next few weeks. So as always, please continue to like, comment, and subscribe here at the Gridiron Expert. Always continue to like, comment, and subscribe on Twitter, on Predictive, and we will see you next time here on the Gridiron Expert.